Good morning, afternoon, or evening, folks, and welcome to Cast of All Trades, the show where we talk about skills development, exploring ideas, and following curiosity. I'm your host, Orion Siebert, and in this episode, I explore 7 different exercises to figure out what you want to do with your life. This isn't me acting as some great arbiter saying, I know what the meaning of life is and how to figure it out. All I'm doing is sharing a couple exercises that I've tried over the years that have been helpful for me. I encourage you to seriously try these out for yourself. It's amazing how much time we spend researching and debating what kind of car to buy or what house to live in, yet we hardly spend time to intentionally sit down and consider the direction of our lives. That's the purpose of this episode, to give you a way to focus and explore what a desirable life might look like for you. And coming up over the next few weeks, I have the pleasure of speaking with a litany of guests, ranging from inventors to writers, where we discuss their craft, their stories, and how they honed their skills. If that sounds interesting to you, then don't forget to subscribe to the show so you don't miss out on those episodes. I believe that about covers it. So, let's get on with the show. So, how this episode going to be structured, you might ask? I'm going to go through these 7 different exercises, mostly on the fly, while occasionally going back in time and sharing how I've used them in the past. But first things first, we need to answer a couple preliminary questions that are going to help you as you go through these different exercises. First one is, where are you now? It's important when you're looking at where you want to go and what you want to do with your life to figure out where you're starting from. If you don't know where you're starting from, it's a little hard to figure out what you need to do to get to the point you want to get to. Of course, the next part is figuring out where do you want to go. That's where many of these exercises come in. You get to decide for yourself, this is the path I want to take. Well, no, this is the destination I want to get to. Then finally, the last part of the question is, what is that path? We're not going to get too far into the weeds on that just because the path is going to be different for everyone. Right now, what we're mostly focused on is where are you now and where do you want to go? Of course, this is going to change over time, so many people might say, what's the point? If I make a plan now, it's probably going to change, who knows, maybe days down the line, or you could change, your whole plan could change in an instant. So what's the point in trying to make a plan now, or trying to figure out where do I want to go in life, what do I want to do? And the point is to have a direction to go in. People don't derive most of their pleasure, happiness, and satisfaction from achieving certain goals that they set for themselves, but actually from the act of pursuing and making progress towards those goals that they set. So you can pivot, and there's nothing wrong with that, but by having a goal and saying, this is the place I'm going, this is what I want to do, then you have a direction you can go in. When you have a direction you could go in, you have something you can progress towards. People enjoy the act of progress. They love going forward, they love seeing progress and reaching towards something, and yet when they get the thing itself, typically, sure, might be a spike of satisfaction or joy from getting it, but that doesn't often last. So that's why we usually need to find another thing, pivot towards that, and keep going in that direction. And plus, you don't need to get to every single goal you set. You don't need to decide something one day and say, this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life, and I cannot change that. That doesn't happen. I've changed my mind many times on the things I want to do. I know no one who has said, I'm going to do this thing, and I'm going to do it for the rest of my life, and it's going to be exactly what I do. I'm pretty sure everyone has either said they're going to do something, they go actively pursue it for a bit, and then they say, oh, actually, I don't want to do that. Let's change course. That's fine, but at least you know that now. So there are many perks to being able to actually say, I want to go do this thing, and having a destination in mind. It doesn't matter if you're going to change it down the line, but what's important is that you have some sort of destination that you're going towards. It doesn't mean that it has to be the final destination, and often, even if you get to it, it won't be the final destination, because there's always one other thing you can do. There's always more stuff you can go and do. So that's just some of my explanation of what's the point of even doing this, because people like to progress, and by having something to progress towards, you can actively progress. So getting into these exercises, first and foremost, is an exercise that if you are going to do it, you have to do it right now. Because once I explain it to you, it's probably not going to work nearly as well. So this is a exercise that has 2 questions involved in it. I'll tell you the first question, then I'll pause to give you time to either pause the podcast episode and work on it for a bit, or just briefly think about it in your head. But ideally, I'll ask you this first question, you'll pause, and you'll go and do it, because that's going to be the most effective way to use this exercise. It's typically a one and done sort of thing for this. So, what is this exercise, you might ask? It's a 2-question exercise. So here is question 1. The first question of this is, what do you want? Very simple. What do you want? So if you're going to actively do this and make the most out of this exercise, I would advise you to pause the podcast episode right about now, or once I finish this sentence, to actually take some time to write out what are the things that you want. They could be physical things, they could be goals and aspirations, they could be, I don't know, just write down whatever comes to mind of what do you want. Write that down. I'm going to pause for a second so that if you want to pause the podcast episode, you can do so right about now. So, coming back to the second question, now that you've written down what do you want, here's where the second question comes into play. What do you want to want? There's a reason why I had you pause the episode so you can go through and write down the first part, because oftentimes when people ask you, what do you want? We often respond with what we think people want to hear, or what we've been trained to respond to people with. We might say, another example of this is, what do you want to be when you grow up? And as a little kid, you might have great aspirations of, I want to be an astronaut, I want to be a king, except oftentimes they won't say, I want to be, they'll say, I will be an astronaut, I will be a monster truck driver, I will be a XYZ, whatever they might say. And as we grow up, we often change those opinions, partially because we grow up and we say, okay, maybe that's less realistic, but maybe in the back of your mind, you still want to be that thing, you still want to do that thing. And we get trained by our environment to find things that the world considers to be acceptable, where they'll say, ooh, you want to get this high-paying job that you make a lot of money with it, it has some great benefits, you want to do that. It's like, awesome, I want to do that. Or you see people showing off their fancy cars on social media and you think to yourself, ooh, everyone says that they want these things, that these are the things that we should want, therefore I want that thing. But over time, we get filled with other people's desires, other people's wishes, other people's wants, and we start to internalize those for ourselves, even though we might not actually want those things. So the point of this exercise is to say, what do you want? And to answer that question without any bias from me. So once you review that list and see, how much of this do I actually want? Is this things that have been hoisted on me by other people? Is this expectations that have been placed on me by friends, by family, by social media, by just the world at large, saying, this is what it means to be successful, or this is what you should be pursuing in life? Then the second question comes into play of, what do you want to want? And this is typically a deeper, more internal view of things, thinking to yourself, actually, like, well, these things are nice that I put down the first one. What I really want is, well, here's a good example of it. Perhaps you wrote down you want a specific career in your, like, what do you want question 1. But in reality, you think about it a bit more and you start to realize, well, that's just what people have told me is a good career, that, like, yeah, this is a good thing that you should go and do. Or, like, you might want to be a good example of this might be, you've been told forever that, oh, you should go become a doctor because doctors are paid well and you will always need doctors. And they're not, whoever says that is not wrong. People will almost always need doctors, and doctors are typically paid very well. But do you want to be a doctor? So you might go down that path, that career path, because you've been essentially pushed down that path by everyone saying, ooh, yeah, you should be a doctor. You'd be great as a doctor. Do you want to be a doctor? I think you want to be a doctor. But really, thinking internally more and deciding for yourself, what do you want to want? You might think to yourself, well, I don't really want to be a doctor. I kind of want to be a teacher. Like, I enjoy teaching much more. When I'm in medical school and I'm talking with people and I'm explaining to them how to do things, I'm enjoying that. I love that. But it's not as accepted by my social group, by my parents, by my peers, because being a teacher isn't a well-paying job, or it's not as high status as being a doctor. But it's what I want to want. So think about it like that. So take some time, fill out the second question of, what do you want to want? Think internally of, what do you desire, not the things that have been hoisted on you by others. And for some people, it will be the exact same as question 1 of, what do you want? But I find for most people, they will they will often, for what do you want, they'll put down the things that people expect them to say. And then for part two, they'll put down things that they actually mean and what they really want. No one else has to see this. This is just for you. So if you're going to lie to yourself, why would you do that? This is just for you. No one else has to see it. So be totally honest with yourself. What do you want to want? So that's exercise 1. Very short, very simple. You can go as in-depth with this as you want, but it's very difficult to do after you know the exercise. So hence why I said you got to do it right now. Okay, moving on to exercise 2. This exercise is called the gravestone technique, and it's another short exercise, and it's very simple. What are the 3 things that you would want written on your gravestone? 3 short sentences. No long run-on sentences with comma splice after comma splice. What are 3 short sentences that you think to yourself, when I die, these are the things that I want written on my gravestone? When people walk by my gravestone and look at it, they'll think to themselves, that's interesting. Or they'll think to themselves, wow, that's cool. Actually, no, I shouldn't even be saying that right now because I don't want to influence what you think about what should be written on your gravestone. Essentially, what do you want people to read when they look at your gravestone years, centuries down the line, and they can only see 3 sentences alongside your name from X to Y? What are those 3 things? I think about this myself from time to time of what do I want people to remember me for? And it changes a lot because I don't always know what I want to do with my life. Sometimes I think to myself, it would be great to, one of the things that would be great on there would be, I'd love to be considered a great father. At the same time, I think to myself, but do I really want a family and kids? Maybe, maybe not. If I did, then certainly that would be something I'd want written on there. As I grow and try to do this whole podcasting thing, I would love written on my gravestone of great teacher or inspiring person, something like that. So think about what are the titles that you would want? What are the things that you'd want people to remember you for? If there could only be these 3 things, it could be basically anything. And then when you're looking at your life, think about how can I steer my life to have the highest likelihood of achieving those 3 short sentences where there would be absolutely nothing else someone could put on that gravestone aside from those 3 things. So that's exercise number 2. Exercise number 3, we are sticking with the slightly morbid path, but this exercise is called obituary writing. And to explain this, I'm going to tell you a little story. So, you wake up and you're walking down the aisle of a church, and you're attending a funeral for 2 people. You see people mourning around you. You see your friends, you see your family. This must have been someone very close and dear to you and all of them. You walk up to the front of the room and you go pay your respects to the coffins, and you look on your left and you see you as you are now, you today. You suddenly die of a heart attack, totally unexpected. No one thought it would happen. And you look to the right and you see you if you were 100 years old and you died of natural causes or whatever it might be. So on your left is you as you are now, and on your right is you as 100 years old. Someone walks up to you and says, the you currently alive attending the funeral walks up to you and asks you to read the obituaries of these 2 individuals. You walk up to the pulpit and you begin to read. What are the things that you say? First, about who you are now if you were to die today, and second, who you are as a 100-year-old having just passed away. This can be a very raw and a very introspective way of thinking about where I am now versus where I want to be. Because you may come to find that you may not be happy with the person you are today. You may come to find that, if I'm looking at it from an outside perspective or from someone else who might be writing this obituary about me, that I'm not the person that I hoped they would write about. You might think to yourself that the person I am now, I'm not quite proud of it, but write it out. Be honest. Be brutally honest about what would your obituary say today if you were to die and someone had to write an obituary about you. And then think about in the future of who do you want, what would you want that obituary to say? If you were to die at the age of 100, what would you want people to remember about you? What stories would you want them to tell? And really think about that. This is probably one of my favorite exercises to compare who I am today versus who I want to become. Because by having that clear distinction of if I were to die today versus if I were to die 100 years from now, be able to clearly see that side by side. I can see where am I deficient, where am I falling short, what are the things I have to do to get from A to B. And yeah, this one can certainly take a while, but if you want to make the most out of it, set aside like an hour maybe to just sit down and start writing something out. It can be a little hard to get started writing because, of course, the blank white page is always very daunting for anyone trying to write something. But just start with, this person, your name, died at the age of X from certain causes, and then talk about what's the reaction of people around you. Are people happy that you're gone? I certainly hope not. Are people sad that they'll miss you, or what's the thoughts running through people's heads? And start telling some stories about what's the kind of life that you have lived, what's the kind of life that 100-year-old you would have lived, and start digging into that. Really look at what does that look like? Who do I want to be versus who am I now? So yeah, obituary writing, that's exercise number 3. Moving on to exercise number 4, in a slightly similar vein, still kind of morbid. Again, this is another story that I have to relate to. So, I call this exercise the Hawaii nuclear test, and I base this off of a real-world event that happened in Hawaii. I don't remember exactly the date, but for about, I want to say it was for 38 minutes, everyone on the island of Hawaii thought that they were getting attacked by a nuclear missile, and there was nothing they could do about it. A false alarm went off as a real nuclear warning or a real missile warning, and for 38 minutes, everyone thought that, oh, we're getting attacked. There's nothing we can do about this. And finally, after that 38 minutes was up, the governor or whoever it was able to get on the intercoms and say, this is a false alarm. Something went wrong, but we're not getting attacked. Everyone's going to be fine. And yeah, so think about that. Seriously, you have half an hour to live. Instead of thinking about what am I going to do with that last half an hour, which is what a lot of people would immediately go to, I want you to put a timer on for 38 minutes. And for that 38 minutes, I want you to sit down and start writing. What are the things you're going to miss? What are the things you're disappointed that you're not going to experience? The things that you're going to think to yourself, oh, I wish I could have done that. Or I wish that I did do this thing. Write those things out. And I want to share my list with you as sort of an example of what are some of the things that I came up with of, I think to myself, what are the things that I would miss if I were to die in the next 38 minutes? Or another way to look at it is if the whole world were to end in the next 38 minutes, what are the things I would miss the most that I would think to myself, dang it, I wish that could have happened, or I wish I could have done that again. I want to do more of that. So I came up with a list of 11 things, and this is my list of 11 things I would want to do that I would be very disappointed with if I were to experience that Hawaii nuclear false alarm test. So, first thing that immediately popped into my head was I would miss telling and experiencing stories. I'm a massive story junkie, and an idea popped into my head earlier that I feel like when I don't have enough stories going on, I feel like a cocaine addict going through withdrawals, like their physical need for stories. I feel like that, except it's like my brain has an immediate need of, I need something compelling. I need a real story to latch onto. I need something to drive my curiosity to keep digging for. So this could be stories in video games, in tabletop games with my friends, in anime, in books, in podcasts, in movies, talking with peers one-on-one. I love stories. That's the first thing that popped into my head. The second one was sort of tied on to that, was game nights with friends. I love that, and I would absolutely miss that if I were to die in the next half an hour and 38 minutes. So game nights with friends. The third one was crafting and creating things. I love making stuff, if you haven't already guessed from some of the previous episodes here. I love choosing a project and saying, I'm going to make that thing. I love digging into the research and figuring out how am I going to do it, making a plan, building some blueprints, and going from there, buying the materials, buying the tools, experimenting, failing time and time again, but each time making a little bit of progress towards it, where I can see the light at the end of the tunnel, and I look at that and I say, I'm going to get there, dang it. I'm going to make this thing or I'm going to die trying. And I love every minute of it. There's something so calming, so enthralling about just working on something, of having a project in mind, whether that be a good example of this was a couple years back. Wow, it's weird for me to say this a couple years ago now. I wanted to get into making prosthetics, so I made my own prototype prosthetic hand, and I did it with a couple blocks of wood, some nails, some staples, some copper wire, and a bunch of fishing line, and some door hinges. And to make that, I hand carved each digit of the finger and each digit of each finger. And it took so long because I was doing it with a crappy wood carving knife. And I would just sit on the floor for hours. And I didn't have anything, I didn't have any podcasts playing, I didn't have any music playing. It was like a perfect Zen moment of me just sitting on the floor, slowly carving away at these blocks of wood to make each little digit of each finger. And over the span of a couple months, I was able to put together a crappy prototype of a prosthetic hand that, if I were to actually hook up some motors to it, it would actually work, where I could move each finger individually, I could move each joint individually, and it was so cool. It took forever, but I loved every second of it because it was so special to me to think, yeah, I made that. I took pieces of garbage, I took scrap wood, and was able to turn that into something super cool. So that's number 3 for me of crafting and creating things. The fourth thing that came to mind was traveling. I love adventure. I love just seeing things out there. There's not too much more to it. I love being able to go out and adventure and try things. The fifth thing that came to mind was walks, like quiet walks through nature. I love walking in the woods when I need to take a break from the computer or take a break from the world at large. I just put on my shoes and go for a walk. Whether that be for 20 minutes or for 2 hours, I'll just go on a walk along a local trail, and it's great. I wish it was closer and more in depth in nature, but some of my favorite moments are just going out for walks in the woods. I have so many memories growing up of going on walks with my dad and my dog, and it was just peaceful. We didn't have to say anything. It would just be us and the trail, occasionally a slight breeze, or you could hear the slight rustling of leaves, the rush of the stream as it went by, and occasionally would get some little water droplets that would fall down on us, and it was just calming. I would desperately, horribly miss those quiet walks through nature. I would miss meeting and exploring ideas with interesting people. It's hard for me to find interesting people to talk to, but when I find them, I love those conversations. They're great. Be able to sit down one-on-one with someone to really dig into perhaps it's deep philosophy or learn about the things that they do, trying to figure out why do they do this thing and teach me about that interesting thing or what most people might not find interesting. I look at it and I think, this person has dedicated so much time to doing this thing. I gotta know why. Explain it to me. Teach me about it. There's something about it that's just enthralling. I would miss my family calls as number 7. Every Sunday, I sit down with my family and we all hop on a call, and it's great. I love being able to catch up with them, being able to be connected with my family. For sure, I would miss those phone calls. The eighth thing is that aha moment when I discover something cool, whether that be me falling down a YouTube rabbit hole of, holy crap, this is a cool topic I never knew anything about, but I'm now fascinated by it. It's the same thing as meeting and exploring ideas with interesting people, but it's that being alone doing it, where it's I'm going through and thinking about ideas and suddenly something pops into my head and bam, it's like, wow, that's shaking my world right now. The ninth thing is problem solving, where I love being able to find problems, or if I have a problem with something or I just want to do something, it sort of goes back to that crafting and creating things. I love having a problem or a set goal and be able to say, I'm going to make this happen, whether it kills me or not. And it's great. Something about having a problem and working on it and seeing the progress being made, it's great. 10, mysteries. It's hard for me to explain why, but I love a good mystery. And finally, 11th is having that sense of progress while doing something cool. And I feel like I've explained that all throughout these 11 things that popped into my head as things I would miss if I were to die in the next 38 minutes. So try this exercise for yourself. It's probably one of my favorites, if not my favorite exercise on this list of just think about it. You are going to die in the next 38 minutes. There is nothing you can do about it. And you're just thinking to yourself, what are the things that I'm going to miss? So, moving on to exercise number 5 is, what is the ideal ordinary week? And this is one that I've had some mixed results with. It's perhaps not my favorite, but I can see a lot of people getting good from this. A similar one that I might do is, what is the average Tuesday that you want? Where you get up and you go and you write out your average Tuesday of, what does work look like? When do you get up? What is that? Like, what is that day like? And the best way I've seen people have the most success with it is if they go like a couple years in the future and they actually look at their calendar, or they get a calendar for a couple of years in the future, and they just pick a week, any week, and they start writing out, what would an average ordinary week look like here that would be ideal? It could be 1 year in the future, it could be 5 years in the future, it could be 10, 20 years in the future, but just write out a full schedule for that week. And that doesn't mean that it has to be every moment filled up. You could have stretches of time laid out for, yeah, it's just going to be flexible time for me to work on random stuff, or for me to go and just have fun doing things. But write out that ideal ordinary week. And when you finish it, you might find that, oh, wait a second, maybe I can make this ideal ordinary week happen right now. Or maybe not the entire week, but I might be able to pull some aspects of it here and there and apply it to my life now. This is a good way to think about, to take the ideas of, oh, this is what my wonderful life could be like, and really put it on paper to see, is that actually the life I would want? Or you could start prototyping and testing it out early to say, maybe down the line you think to yourself, I want to take a bunch of lessons all at the same time. I want to do dance lessons, I want to do guitar lessons, I want to do XYZ other thing. And you can look at your schedule now and say, okay, what if I just tried guitar lessons for a bit? Let's see if that's something I would actually want to do down the line. You can try it out for a bit. You can prototype that ideal ordinary week in spurts or in little bits. Or if you find something that, like, you look at that ideal ordinary week, you might find a few things in there and say, oh, I could actually do that now. And you can take that and just put it into your week now. It's a good way to look at the future and think, this is what I'm working towards, this is what I want my days to be like, and look at where you are now and say, actually, I can make this a little better. So, yeah, the ideal ordinary week, exercise number 5. Exercise number 6 is an idea that I believe came from, I want to say it was from Stanford, is where this idea came from, but it's called the Odyssey Paths. And to briefly explain what this exercise is, it's that you have 3 life paths that you're going to plan out. The way that they did it at Stanford was looking at your life 5 years from now, like an average day in your life 5 years from now in 3 different situations. So I'm going to walk you through my Odyssey path that I did. I want to say it was back in January of 2020 when I was just at the beginning of college, and I wanted to figure out, what am I going to do with my time here at college. So at that point, I was a biotechnology, genetic engineering student, but I already knew that I was switching to mechanical engineering at the time. So here are what the 3 paths were for the Odyssey paths. The first one was to take your current path 5 years from now, ideally if everything goes as planned and everything goes quite well. What does that look like, an average day in your life 5 years from now, if you continue down the path you're currently on? So for me, that would have been, what would life look like as a mechanical engineering student if I were to go for 5 years? At that point, I would just graduate from my undergrad, maybe have been graduated for a year. I might be going on to get a master's degree in mechanical engineering or a more specialized thing in there, or maybe I'll be going into industry somewhere. So that's roughly where I would have been at that point. And I had an okay idea of what I would have been studying at that point, what I would have actually learned at that time, but I didn't have a great idea. So Odyssey path number 1 would be me as a mechanical engineer. The Odyssey path number 2 is considered the other path. And the way that you do this one is you look at the current path that you're on and you say, okay, if this was totally blocked off to me, what would be the other path that I would choose? What would be one other path that I might take? And at that time, I was also really fascinated with botany, in particular toxicology. There's something about plants, and in particular poisonous plants, that just fascinates me. Even to this day, I still want to learn more about toxicology and how different plants work, and how I can do some herbalism stuff to take plants that might be poisonous in some situations and turn them into medicinal herbs. And anyways, that endlessly fascinates me. So I started creating a life path of, what would it look like if I switched from studying mechanical engineering to studying botany and toxicology? And I'll be spending a lot of time in a lab. I'll be out in a greenhouse a lot, probably working with plants. And I thought to myself, that's cool. Like, I might see myself doing that, but I feel like it might be better as a hobby. But looking at that and seriously consider, what would life be like 5 years from now, an average day in the life of me being a botanist slash toxicologist? And I just thought, okay, that's another path. It's an option. And finally, the third Odyssey path is what I call the wild path. And the idea of this path is that what would you do if money and expectations didn't matter? Like, it doesn't matter what your parents say, it doesn't matter what society says. What are the things, like, what's the thing that you would want to do with your life 5 years from now if, like, money and expectations didn't matter? And I thought about this for a bit, and ever since I was a little kid, every time, like, every once in a while, it would pop up in my head of, I want to be a game designer, I want to make video games. And I started charting that out of, what would that look like 5 years from now if I were to try to study game design and try to make a living as an indie game developer? And just thought about that, dug into it a bit more, found different resources. I said, okay, that's interesting. And I looked at these three Odyssey paths, and I decided for myself, at that point, I wanted to follow mechanical engineering because I thought, yeah, this would be a good base. I could do mechanical engineering because I love crafting, I love making things. And then down the line, if I wanted to, I could learn how to do indie game design, and I could make games on my own, and I can grow a garden on my own and grow poisonous plants and start learning more about toxicology on my own. But mechanical engineering, that requires more of a degree to be able to get into that industry to do that thing. But keep in mind that currently I'm not a mechanical engineer, I'm not a botanist, I'm not a game designer. I eventually decided years later that no, I don't want to do any of these paths. I'm going to do something different. So once again, bringing up that point at the beginning of these aren't setting your life set, these aren't fixing your life in stone. You aren't going to decide these things and say, I'm going to follow this, whether, like, no matter what happens, this is going to be my life now. This is just a good way for you to experiment and see, what do I want to try? Because at the time of me doing these Odyssey paths, all of these seemed like great options to me. And I thought to myself that, yeah, I could be a mechanical engineer. I'm going to try this. I'm going to do it. I'm going to take it seriously. But ultimately, after doing it for a couple of years, I found, I don't actually want to do this. I'm going to do something different. And then I went into business, and then I did more entrepreneurship stuff, and here I am recording a podcast now talking about my Odyssey paths, so there we go. But what's the point of this exercise? The point is to see that you have a number of options, that you have a number of different lives you could live, and to see that, oh, maybe that wild path that I thought was so wild and so out there, maybe I could incorporate some of those elements into my current path, or I might find that the secondary path might actually just be better for me. Really, this is just a way for you to sit down and lay out a couple different options. And note, this doesn't just have to be 3 Odyssey paths. If you think that you have 7 different lives inside of you, that you could go 7 different directions, and each one of them has their whole life ahead of you, where, like, you could be successful in all of them, great. Write out each of those Odyssey paths, start comparing them, start seeing which one of these would I want to do. Like, assuming all goes well, and assuming that I tried my best with it, which one of these paths could I go and do? And what are some elements of some of the other paths that I could take with me, that I could take along for the ride? A good example for me would be that even though I'm not in mechanical engineering, in botany or toxicology, or in game design anymore, I'm still making things. I still love craftsmanship and putting things together with my hands. I love making things by hand and just doing that. That's the aspect of mechanical engineering I loved doing. For plants and toxicology and botany, I still love gardening. I love cooking, I love cleaning, I love homemaking, and that's the aspect of botany and toxicology I particularly loved. Sure, I wanted to do some stuff in a lab, but that was less interesting to me than the actual just tending to plants part. Or also, I was still fascinated by the biotechnology, genetic engineering, and all that stuff, and I still want to do that down the line. But that's another thing of, okay, I'm just going to keep that in the back pocket, say, eventually I'll get around to that. And then the game designer stuff, I've been doing that on and off for years now, and I eventually learned that, yeah, it's okay. There are certain aspects of it I like, but really, there are other things I'd much prefer doing. So I was able to take elements from each of those paths, try them out for a bit, and see what I want to keep, what I want to throw away. And it was only because I was able to go through each of these Odyssey paths that I was able to take a peek into the future and see, what is it that these each look like down the line? So that's exercise number 6, Odyssey Paths. And exercise number 7, last but certainly not least, is a very popular exercise that some people do. And it is going to be one that you might be familiar with if you've read the book that shares the same name. And this concept is called Ikigai. And this concept is, Ikigai is a Japanese concept that roughly translates to a reason for being or a reason to live. And the term combines the Japanese words iki, meaning life, and gai, meaning value or worth. And it represents one's personal, one's life purpose or bliss, what brings joy and inspiration daily. And this doesn't mean that it's something that that's going to be absolutely perfect, that this is the only thing that I will need for my entire life. No, it's an idea that this is the thing that you're going to derive value from, that's going to bring you joy for now. And it could change over time, but that's the rough idea of it. And to find one's ikigai, I came across 4 general questions, and I have a couple sub-questions that I've added on below that many people recommend of, if you can answer these questions and find what overlaps across all 4 of them, then perhaps that thing is your ikigai. So, what are these 4 questions? I'm going to go through them one by one, where I'll go through the question first, and I'll go over some of my sub-questions and maybe provide some examples or some other ideas of what that might look like. So, the first question is, what do you love? And then some of the sub-questions I have here are, what have you never gotten bored of? What's something that you've always been drawn back to time and time again? And what gets you into flow so much so that you forget to eat or drink whenever you do it? That last one might seem a bit extreme, but that's something that I've had personal experience with, where personally I love crafting and making things. Love it more than anything else, basically, where I'm almost never bored of it. When I pick up a project, I'm sucked into that project. When I'm working with my hands, designing something, like making a one-of-a-kind piece of art, that's amazing. It's unique, and I'm always drawn back to it. And sometimes I get so drawn into it, so in the flow, that I can go hours, or I could just go all day without eating or drinking, and I totally forget. And then later that night, I realize, oh, wait a second, I didn't eat since yesterday. But that's just a rough example of what that might look like for you. The second question is, what are you good at or willing to get good at? I added that willing to get good at as part of it because oftentimes people aren't actually very good at a lot of things. But if you're willing to get good at something or willing to put in the work to get better at it, then you can still consider that a potential ikigai thing. And like I said before, there's fun in the journey. So if you're willing to get good at something, learn to have fun with getting good at it. So what are some of the sub-questions that can go with this to help spur on some ideas? So some of the sub-questions are, what skills have you been spending time to practice? For example, I'm a pianist. I have to spend time practicing piano if I want to play well. Second, what do people look to you for help with? When people have a problem, do they turn to you to say, hey, Orion, or hey, whoever you are, you're good at this, can you help me out with it? Third sub-question is there anything you want to be good at? Where it's simple, do you want to get good at a certain thing? Do you look at a certain skill and think to yourself, dang it, I want to get good at that thing? Then sure, you could consider that. If you want to get good at it, you're actually willing to put in the effort to get good at it. And fourth, what are you willing to do that other people aren't? Oftentimes, a good piece of advice in business or professionally is find the thing that you're good at and willing to do that other people don't want to do, because that's where people are willing to pay you and what people are willing to, where you're able to provide value for people. If you can do things that other people don't want to do, that's great, especially if you're happy to do that stuff. A good example of that for me is that a lot of people don't like to tune their piano. It's something that they either think, oh, I don't know how to do that, or I can't do that, or it's time consuming, it's just a lot of effort. That's where I come in. I enjoy tuning pianos. It's something I can do in an hour to an hour and a half to 2 hours, and I'm able to charge them a pretty penny for it. I'm able to come in, tune a piano quickly, play a little something, awesome, that sounds good, they're happy with it, I'm happy with it. It's a skill that I developed, that I was willing to develop. I could say, yeah, I'm willing to get good at this, and I'm pretty good at it. That other people aren't willing to get good at, or they don't want to get good at. So that's a good example of what are you good at or willing to get good at. Question number 3 is, what can you get paid for? Once again, building off of the piano tuning thing, I could get paid for piano tuning because it provides value for people and they're happy when it's done. Some of the sub-questions that you could ask to help spur on some ideas is, what have you been paid for it to do before or in the past? What would you be doing if you were not at your current job? And what would you want to get paid for? That said, be a little realistic with the what would you want to get paid for thing. Certainly there are many aspects and many ways you can get paid for different tasks. It's just a matter of how you frame it. So you can get a little wild with it, but just learn how to figure out, if I'm doing this thing, what are some different options I could do to get paid for it? For example, I guess let's go with this whole podcasting thing I'm doing. A lot of people think, oh yeah, you can get paid to do a podcast, but many people don't really know how to get paid to do a podcast. There are a couple different options that you can go for. You can try to get some company to sponsor you, to have you read off a certain ad for them, and they'll pay you to do that. Or you could have affiliate marketing links in your podcast where you might reference a certain piece of software or a certain thing. Then you have an affiliate marketing link where people will click on that link, they might go buy the product, and you get a kickback from it. Those are just two very simple examples of how someone as a podcaster could get paid to do that work. And thinking about that, what might that look like as someone who doesn't know what podcasting is, where they might think to themselves, I want to get paid to talk to people and have interesting conversations. That's a good example of what being a professional podcaster might be, of how do I turn, I want to talk to interesting people, to I want to get paid to talk to interesting people. So yeah, just see how you can extrapolate some of those ideas to go from this is what I want to get paid for into an actual way to get paid for it. The final question of Ikigai is, what does the world, and I put in parentheses here, your world and your people need? Asking and looking at the world as a whole can be very daunting and very, I find it very hand-wavy of, oh, what does the world need? Because the world doesn't need anything. There's something for everyone out there, but I feel like what's more important is to focus on what does your world need? What do your people need? What does your audience, your group, your community, what do they need that you can provide? And some of the sub-questions here are, who are the people, groups, or communities that you care about and want to do something for? If you look at the groups first, then maybe you can find something that they're lacking that you're able to provide value for. Second sub-question is, what are the people like, where you're looking at those people and you think, all these people have these few traits in common, or they all need this thing. The third sub-question is, what do they need? Look at those people. What do they need? And the fourth sub-question is, how can you contribute to create a positive effect on those around you? Where, what can you do in your immediate vicinity, in your world, that provides value, that people would want to help you out, that people want to support you with it, that people want to pay you to do it? So, those are the 7 different life exercises of figuring out, what do I want to do with my life? So what do you think? Which one of these exercises are you going to try? I hope that you try a bunch of them. See what works for you, see what doesn't. I know some of them work better for me, some of them don't. Or do you think this is all a massive waste of time? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this episode, then please share with a friend you think would like it, or share it on social media. It would absolutely mean the world to me, and it helps the podcast grow so much. With all that said, thanks for listening. I greatly appreciate it, and I'll talk to you all later. Ciao.